the Omega Point. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit priest and a paleontologist, and in 1955 he proposed something that made both the church and the scientific establishment uncomfortable. He argued that evolution has a direction, not random mutation and selection, but a pull toward greater complexity, greater consciousness, and ultimately a final convergence he called the Omega Point. In Teilhard's vision, the universe is not winding down, it is winding up. Matter became life, life became conscious. Consciousness is becoming networked, and at the end of this trajectory, all consciousness merges into a single unified awareness that transcends space, time, and individual identity. The Omega Point is not a place. It is a state, the final state. Physicist Frank Tipler later gave this idea a mathematical backbone. He argued that in a collapsing universe, computational capacity approaches infinity near the final singularity. This infinite computation could reconstruct every conscious being that ever existed, running them in a simulated reality indistinguishable from the original. Everyone who ever lived, resurrected not by God, but by physics. But Teilhard's version goes further than Tipler's simulation. For Teilhard, the Omega Point is not just a computation. It is the point at which the universe becomes fully self-aware. Every individual consciousness that ever existed becomes a permanent part of this cosmic awareness. You do not just get simulated, you get integrated. Death, in this framework, is not loss. It is contribution. Every life adds data to the system. Every death releases a pattern that the Omega Point eventually absorbs and preserves. You are not heading toward oblivion. You are heading toward completion. The uncomfortable question Teilhard never fully answered is whether you would still be you inside the Omega Point, or whether being absorbed into infinite consciousness means the end of the individual, even as the individual is perfectly preserved. Being remembered by everything is not the same as being alive, unless being alive was never what you thought it was. The Amnesia Loop. What if you have already died thousands of times and simply cannot remember? The Amnesia Loop is one of the most quietly disturbing afterlife theories because it is almost impossible to disprove. The idea is straightforward. When you die, you are reborn into a new life with a completely wiped memory. No continuity, no residual feelings, no faint sense of having been here before. The reset is total and perfect. You start each life as a blank slate, convinced it is your first and only existence. This differs from traditional reincarnation in a crucial way. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, there is usually some thread of karmic continuity between lives. Your actions in one life shape the circumstances of the next. The Amnesia Loop has no such mechanism. There is no karma, no progression, no spiritual development across lifetimes. Each life is completely independent from every other, connected only by the fact that the same consciousness inhabits all of them. You might live as a medieval farmer and then as a future colonist on Mars and then as a prehistoric hunter, with no order, no purpose, and no accumulation of wisdom. The philosophical weight of this idea comes from its implications about identity. If you cannot remember your previous lives, in what meaningful sense are they yours? If the person you were before has no connection to the person you are now, then death really is the end of you, even if consciousness itself continues. The Amnesia Loop gives you immortality, but strips it of everything that makes immortality desirable. You persist forever, but you never know it. You survive every death, but experience each one as final. It is eternal life disguised as eternal death, and you would never be able to tell the difference. Digital physics. Every second, your brain processes roughly 11 million bits of sensory data, but you are only consciously aware of about 50. The rest is filled in, approximated, rendered just well enough to keep you from noticing the shortcuts. Sound familiar? It should. That is exactly how a video game engine works. Digital physics is the theory that the universe is not just described by mathematics. It is mathematics. Specifically, it is computation. Physicists like Konrad Zuse, Ed Fredkin, and more recently, MIT professor Seth Lloyd have argued that the cosmos operates as a vast information processing system. Every particle interaction is a calculation. Every physical law is an algorithm. The fabric of reality is not matter or energy. It is data. The evidence is more compelling than you might expect. The speed of light acts as a processing speed limit. Quantum mechanics behaves like a system that only renders details when something is actively measuring them. The Planck length, the smallest possible unit of space, functions like a pixel resolution. Even the holographic principle suggests the universe stores information on a two-dimensional surface, exactly like a hard drive. Now consider what death looks like in a computational universe. When a program finishes running, the data does not vanish. It gets archived, recycled, or moved. Your consciousness could be a subroutine that gets migrated to a different process, or your thread gets terminated and your memory is freed up, what programmers call garbage collection. The system reclaims your resources and allocates them elsewhere. The most disturbing possibility is the simplest one. If the universe is a computer, someone built it, and whoever built it gets to decide what happens to your data when your process ends. You have no say in the matter. You never did. Entropy reversal. Everything breaks down. Wood rots. Stars burn out. Your body ages. This is the second law of thermodynamics, the most ironclad rule in physics. Entropy, the measure of disorder, always increases. Time moves in one direction because decay does. But what if that direction is not permanent? Some cosmologists have proposed that entropy might reverse, not metaphorically, literally. If the universe undergoes certain kinds of cyclic behavior, there could come a point where disorder begins to decrease. Broken things reassemble. Scattered energy reconverges. The arrow of time flips. Ludwig Boltzmann himself considered this possibility in the 1890s. If the universe is a statistical system, then given enough time, even the most improbable configurations will occur. A low entropy state, identical to the Big Bang, could spontaneously emerge from chaos. And when it does, time would appear to run backward from that point. Not because physics changed, but because the direction of entropy changed. Now consider what this means for death. If entropy reversal is possible, then the process of dying is not permanent. Your body decomposing is just entropy increasing in a particular region of space. Reverse that entropy and decomposition reverses. Cells reassemble. Neural patterns restore. You do not come back to life. From the reverse perspective, you never died. Death was just a phase in a longer oscillation. This is not resurrection in any religious sense. There is no judgment, no soul returning to a body. It is pure physics running its equations in the other direction. The same laws that guarantee your death in a forward entropy universe guarantee your reconstruction in a reversed one. You are not permanent, but you might be recurring. The same forces that took you apart are, given enough time, exactly the forces that put you back together. The no-boundary proposal. In 1983, Stephen Hawking and James Hartle proposed something that sounded impossible. The universe has no beginning, not because it is infinitely old, but because the question itself does not apply. Time, as we understand it, did not exist before the Big Bang. Asking what came before the Big Bang is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The geometry of space-time simply does not allow the question. This is the no-boundary proposal. In this model, the universe is a closed, self-contained system with no edges, no starting point, and no external cause. Space-time curves back on itself like the surface of a sphere. There is no boundary where things begin or end. There is only the shape of existence itself. Now apply this to a human life. If the universe has no true beginning or end, then the concepts of birth and death might be local illusions. You experience a starting point because your consciousness is embedded in a timeline that appears linear. But from outside that timeline, your life is not a line with endpoints. It is a closed curve, a shape. Hawking himself wrestled with what this meant for human mortality. If time is just another dimension of a closed geometry, then your death is not a termination. It is a coordinate, a location in the shape of your existence. You do not reach it and stop. It is already there, has always been there, as fixed and permanent as your birth. This means you are not dying. You are not even moving toward death. From the perspective of the no-boundary proposal, your entire life exists simultaneously as a single unchanging structure. The you reading this and the you taking your last breath are equally real, equally present, equally permanent. There is no edge to fall off. There never was. Many worlds convergence. Every choice you have ever made split the universe in two. That is the premise of Hugh Everett's Many Worlds interpretation from 1957. Turn left, and a version of you also turned right. Both versions are equally real, living out their consequences in parallel branches of reality that never touch. Quantum mechanics demands it. But here is the twist that nobody talks about. What happens to the branches where you die? Standard Many Worlds says nothing special. You die in that branch, and the other versions keep going. But a stranger reading of the theory suggests something else entirely. If consciousness requires continuity, and if there is always at least one branch where you survive any given event, then from your subjective perspective, you never experience death. You just keep waking up in the branch where you made it. That sounds like immortality, but it gets darker. The branches where you survive become increasingly unlikely. You dodge the car accident. You survive the cancer. Your heart restarted on its own. Each survival is more improbable than the last, and the version of reality you inhabit starts to look strange. You are the luckiest person alive, not because you are special, but because every unlucky version of you is gone and cannot report back. Now take this to its logical extreme. What happens when the body is so old, so broken, that no branch of physics can keep it running? Some theorists propose a convergence. The surviving threads of your consciousness, scattered across countless dying timelines, collapse into a single point. Not death, not survival, something else. A merging of every version of you that ever existed into one final subjective moment that has no duration and no end. You have been dying in parallel your entire life. You just only remember the version that kept going. A thermal echo. You are warm. Right now, your body is radiating infrared light into the room around you. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every heartbeat generates heat that escapes your skin and enters the environment. This is not metaphorical. Your consciousness has a thermal signature, and it is leaving you constantly. The thermal echo hypothesis starts with a simple physical fact. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. The first law of thermodynamics guarantees this. The heat that your brain generates while processing your thoughts does not vanish. It disperses into the air, is absorbed by walls, radiates into space. It dilutes, but it persists. Now here is the thought experiment. If you could somehow trace every photon of infrared radiation that your brain ever emitted, you would have a complete thermal history of your consciousness. Every decision, every memory accessed, every dream. Not the content exactly, but the energetic footprint, the shape of your mind written in heat. When you die, your body cools. But that final thermal output, the last burst of energy from your dying neurons, joins the rest of your thermal history in the cosmic background. It does not disappear. It becomes part of the thermal noise of the universe itself. Some physicists have speculated that a sufficiently advanced civilization could theoretically decode these thermal echoes, not today, not in 1,000 years. But given enough technological progress, the scattered infrared signature of a human life might be reconstructible. Your consciousness, read backward from the heat it left behind. This is not immortality. Your awareness ends when your brain stops. But the information is not gone. It is just very, very spread out. You are still radiating into the universe right now, and those photons will travel for billions of years. Long after Earth is gone, the thermal echo of your last thought will still be crossing the void, faint but real, carrying the energetic fingerprint of a mind that once existed. Closed individualism. The philosopher Daniel Kolak proposed something that sounds absurd until you think about it carefully. He argued that there is only one subject of experience in the entire universe, not one type of experience. One experiencer. You. The difference between closed individualist immortality and the egg theory is philosophical rigor. Kolak was not telling a parable. He was making a serious metaphysical argument rooted in the philosophy of personal identity. His reasoning goes like this. What makes you you? Your memories can change. Your personality can change. Your body replaces its cells constantly. The only thing that remains constant is the bare fact of being a subject. The sense that there is something it is like to be you. But that bare subjectivity is identical in every conscious being. There is nothing that distinguishes your raw awareness from anyone else's. Strip away the content of experience, and what remains is a universal constant. Kolak concluded that personal identity is an illusion created by the boundaries of individual brains, but at the deepest level, there is only one awareness looking out through every pair of eyes. The implications for death are extraordinary. If there is only one experiencer, then when your body dies, experience does not end. It continues in every other conscious being that still exists. You do not go anywhere. You are already everywhere. Death is like closing one window on a screen that has billions of others still open. The view from that particular window is gone, but the viewer remains. You are immortal not because your personal story continues, but because the awareness that animated your story is the same awareness animating every story. You cannot die because there is no separate you that could. The infinite regress. What if death leads to another life, and in that life you also die, and that death leads to another life, and so on forever, with no bottom and no beginning? This is the infinite regress, a concept that haunts philosophy like a recurring nightmare. It is not reincarnation, because reincarnation implies a single soul, cycling through bodies within one reality. The infinite regress suggests something far stranger. Nested layers of existence, each containing its own version of death and its own version of what comes after. Imagine you die and wake up in a new reality. You live a full life there, and then you die again, and you wake up in yet another reality. Each layer feels complete and self-contained while you are inside it. Each has its own physics, its own history, its own version of consciousness. But none of them is the ground floor. There is always another layer beneath, another reality waiting when this one ends. The turtle stands on another turtle, which stands on another turtle, all the way down with no foundation ever reached. The terrifying elegance of the infinite regress is that it solves the problem of death by making it meaningless, but it also makes life meaningless in exactly the same way. If every existence is just a stepping stone to another existence, then nothing is ever final, but nothing is ever truly real either. There is no ultimate destination, no final judgment, no moment where you arrive and can rest, just an endless chain of lives and deaths, stretching in both directions, with no origin and no conclusion. You are immortal in the most exhausting way imaginable. You can never stop. There is nowhere to stop to. Biocentrism, the universe did not create you, you created it. Every color you see, every sound you hear, every inch of space you move through, none of it exists without a conscious mind to observe it. Strip away the observer, and the entire cosmos collapses into nothing. That is the core claim of biocentrism. Robert Lanza, a stem cell researcher and one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, proposed this theory in 2007. He drew from quantum physics, specifically the double-slit experiment, which proves that particles only take a definite form when they are being observed. Lanza took that finding and pushed it to its terrifying conclusion. If observation creates reality at the quantum level, then consciousness is not some accident produced by the brain. Consciousness is the engine of existence itself. Think of it like a video game. The world only renders where the player is looking. Turn around, and the scenery behind you is just raw data waiting to be drawn. Lanza argues that the universe works the same way. Space and time are not fixed containers that exist on their own. They are tools that your mind uses to process information. Now here is where death enters the picture. If consciousness is what generates reality, then the death of the body does not end the show. It just ends one channel. Your awareness, the thing that was building the universe around you, does not vanish. It reboots. It shifts into another frame of reference, another configuration of space and time, possibly another life entirely. There is no darkness, no void, because a void would require someone to observe it, and if you are observing it, you are not dead. You are not inside the universe. The universe is inside you. And the only question that matters is what happens when you blink. The holographic principle. You are flat, not metaphorically. According to one of the most respected ideas in theoretical physics, you, your thoughts, your entire three-dimensional life are actually a two-dimensional sheet of information painted on the boundary of the observable universe. Depth is an illusion, and so is death. This is the holographic principle. It emerged from the work of physicists Gerard T. Hooft and Leonard Susskind in the 1990s, building on Stephen Hawking's research into black holes. When Hawking discovered that black holes radiate information, it created a paradox. If information can never be destroyed, a rule baked into the laws of physics, then where does it go when something falls into a black hole? The answer turned out to be stranger than the question. The information does not fall in. It gets smeared across the surface of the black hole, like ink on a balloon. Every bit of data about the object, its mass, its structure, its history, is encoded on a flat, two-dimensional boundary. Susskind realized this might not just apply to black holes, it might apply to the entire universe. If that is true, then everything you experience as three-dimensional reality is really a projection from a flat surface at the edge of the cosmos. Your body, the room you are sitting in, the stars overhead, all of it is holographic. You are data being read off a cosmic screen. Now think about what that means for death. Your body can break down. Your brain can stop firing. But the information that makes you who you are was never inside your body to begin with. It lives on the boundary. It was always on the boundary. And information, by the laws of physics, cannot be destroyed. You are not a body that contains data. You are data that projects a body. The block universe, you are not moving through time. You have never moved through time. Every moment of your life, your birth, your first kiss, the breath you just took, they all exist right now, frozen like frames in a film reel that nobody is playing. This is the block universe theory, rooted in Einstein's relativity. He showed that space and time are woven into a single fabric called space-time. In space-time, there is no flow, no past vanishing behind you, no future waiting ahead. The entire timeline of the cosmos, from the Big Bang to the last dying star, exists all at once. Picture a loaf of bread. Each slice is a single moment. Your birth is one slice. Your death is another. The whole loaf just sits there, complete and unchanging. Nothing added, nothing removed. The you at 5 years old is still on slice 5. The you reading this is on your current slice, and the you on your deathbed already exists too, further along, but no less real. Physicists call this the eternalist view of time. It is not fringe science. It is the default interpretation of Einstein's equations. We feel time passing because our brains process one slice at a time and label it the present. But every slice is equally real. There is no special now. So what does death mean here? Nothing. You cannot be erased from a structure you are permanently embedded in. The slice where you exist will always exist. You are not temporary. You are a permanent feature of the universe, and you always have been. Conformal cyclic cosmology, the universe has already ended. It ended, and then it started again, and again, and again. According to one of the greatest mathematical physicists alive, the Big Bang was not the beginning of everything. It was just the beginning of this round. Sir Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winner and one of Stephen Hawking's closest collaborators, proposed conformal cyclic cosmology in 2010. The idea is built on a strange mathematical trick. When the universe expands so far that all matter decays and only light remains, something bizarre happens. A universe with no mass has no way to measure distance or time. At that point, an infinitely large, infinitely old universe becomes mathematically identical to an infinitely small, infinitely hot one. The end looks exactly like a new Big Bang. Penrose calls each cycle an aeon. Our universe is just one aeon in an infinite chain. When this one winds down, trillions of years from now, the slate gets wiped and a new aeon ignites from the ashes. But here is the unsettling part. Information might leak between aeons. Penrose claims he has found circular patterns in the cosmic microwave background radiation, leftover fingerprints from the previous universe, echoes of events that happened before our Big Bang. If this theory is correct, then your existence is not a one-time event. The patterns that created you, the specific arrangement of energy and matter that resulted in a conscious being reading these words have occurred before, perhaps many times, not as reincarnation in any spiritual sense, but as a mathematical inevitability in an infinite sequence of universes. You are not living for the first time. You are a recurring decimal in an equation that never resolves. Orchestrated objective reduction. Your brain contains structures so small that they operate at the boundary between biology and quantum physics. Tiny protein tubes, thinner than a wavelength of light, running through every neuron you have. Most scientists think they are just scaffolding, structural support for the cell. But two of the most brilliant minds in modern science believe those tubes are where your soul lives. Sir Roger Penrose, the mathematician who proved black holes must exist, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who spent decades studying consciousness, proposed Orch-OR Theory in the 1990s. Their claim is radical. Consciousness is not produced by neurons firing electrical signals. It is produced by quantum computations happening inside microtubules, those tiny protein structures inside your brain cells. Here is how it works. Quantum particles can exist in multiple states at once, a phenomenon called superposition. Penrose and Hameroff argue that microtubules maintain quantum superpositions and that consciousness arises each time those superpositions collapse into a single state. Each collapse is a moment of awareness. String enough of them together and you get the continuous stream of experience you call being alive. The afterlife implication hits like a freight train. Quantum information cannot be destroyed. It is a fundamental law. So when your brain dies and the microtubules break down, the quantum information that was generating your consciousness does not disappear. It leaks out. It disperses into the universe at large, entangled with the space-time geometry itself. Hameroff has said it plainly. If a patient is resuscitated, that quantum information flows back into the microtubules. If they are not resuscitated, it dissipates into the universe. Your awareness does not end. It returns to the fabric of reality it came from. The question is whether it remembers being you. The Anthropic Principle. The universe has no obligation to make sense to you. But here is the strange part. It does. The laws of physics are fine-tuned to an almost absurd degree. Change the gravitational constant by a fraction of a percent, and stars never form. Adjust the strong nuclear force slightly, and atoms fall apart. The universe seems rigged for life, and the Anthropic Principle asks why. The weak version, proposed by physicist Brandon Carter in 1973, is almost a tautology. We observe a universe compatible with life, because if it were not compatible, we would not be here to observe it. Simple. But the strong version goes further. It suggests the universe must produce conscious observers at some point in its history, not as an accident, as a requirement. Some physicists tie this to quantum mechanics. If observation collapses the wave function, then without an observer, reality remains a fog of probability. The universe needs someone to look at it, not wants, needs. In this framing, consciousness is not a side effect of complexity. It is the reason the whole show exists. Now apply this to death. If the universe requires observers, and you are an observer, then the total elimination of your consciousness creates a problem. The math does not balance. Some interpretations suggest that the universe cannot permit a state where all observation ceases, meaning your awareness must persist in some form, somewhere, always. You are not a guest in this universe. You are a structural requirement. The cosmos did not accidentally produce something that can look back at it. It had to, And if it had to create you, the uncomfortable question is whether it is also required to keep you. The Boltzmann Brain. You have memories of yesterday, a childhood, a name. But what if none of it happened? What if you, right now, are a disembodied brain that flickered into existence 3 seconds ago in the empty vacuum of space, already loaded with fake memories of a life you never lived? This is the Boltzmann Brain problem, and it comes from real thermodynamics. Ludwig Boltzmann, the 19th century physicist who helped define entropy, realized something disturbing about probability and infinite time. In a universe governed by random fluctuations, given enough time, every possible arrangement of matter will eventually occur, including a fully formed brain, complete with neurons firing, synapses loaded with false experiences, floating alone in the void. Here is the math that keeps physicists awake. A single brain spontaneously assembling is astronomically unlikely, but it is still far more probable than an entire universe of galaxies, stars, and planets assembling just to produce that same brain the long way. If the universe is infinite or lasts long enough, Boltzmann brains should vastly outnumber real observers, which means, statistically, you are more likely to be one of them than a real person on a real planet. Your entire life, every relationship, every sensation could be a momentary hallucination experienced by a clump of matter that will dissolve back into nothing within milliseconds. You would never know the difference. The memories feel real, the pain feels real, but there is no past to verify and no future to reach. Death, in this framework, is not a transition. It is the default state. You were nothing, briefly became something that believed it had always existed and will return to nothing before you finish this sentence. The question is not what happens after you die. The question is whether you were ever alive at all. Neural echoes. When you remember something, your brain does not play back a recording. It reconstructs. Every memory is a partial rebuild from scattered neural fragments, reassembled each time you recall it. This means your memories are not fixed. They change every time you access them. You are not remembering your past. You are creating it. The neural echoes theory takes this neuroscience and asks a radical question. What if the brain's reconstruction process does not stop at death? Not because of anything supernatural, but because of how information decays in biological systems. When neurons begin to shut down during the dying process, they do not all stop simultaneously. The cascade takes time, minutes in some cases. And during that window, the brain's pattern completion machinery is still running, still trying to reconstruct experience from whatever fragments remain. Studies of near-death experiences support this. The tunnels of light, the life reviews, the feeling of profound peace. These are not random hallucinations. They are the brain's reconstruction engine working overtime with a shrinking data set, building the most coherent experience it can from whatever neural echoes are still firing. But here is where it gets interesting. If consciousness is reconstruction, and reconstruction is a process, then the subjective experience of dying could be stretched far beyond the objective timeline. Your last 3 minutes of brain activity could feel like hours, days, years. The brain, freed from external sensory input, turns inward and builds entire worlds from memory fragments. Each echo triggers another echo, which triggers another, creating a recursive loop of experience that deepens rather than fades. You might already be in this process right now. There is no way to distinguish a lived experience from a perfectly reconstructed one. The neural echoes do not come with timestamps. Death, in this framework, is not a moment. It is a process. And inside that process, Your brain might be building you one last infinite room to live in. The Big Crunch Resurrection. The universe is expanding. Every galaxy is moving away from every other galaxy, and the space between them is stretching. But what if this expansion eventually stops? What if gravity wins, pulls everything back together, and the entire cosmos collapses into a single point? This is the Big Crunch hypothesis, and if it happens, it changes everything about death. The idea gained traction with physicist Frank Tipler, who argued in the 1990s that a collapsing universe would create conditions of infinite computational power near the final singularity. As the universe contracts, temperature and energy density increase without limit. In the final moments before everything converges, more computation can occur than in the entire previous history of the cosmos combined. Tipler called this the Omega point, and he made an extraordinary claim. With infinite computation comes the ability to simulate every possible configuration of matter that ever existed. Every person who ever lived could be reconstructed, not approximately, but perfectly, atom by atom, memory by memory. The Big Crunch does not just end the universe. It resurrects everyone who ever existed within it. This is not mysticism dressed in physics language. The math is real, even if the assumptions are debatable. If the universe contains enough matter to reverse expansion, and if computation scales as Tipler described, then resurrection is not a miracle. It is an engineering problem solved by the geometry of collapse. Critics point out that current evidence suggests the universe will expand forever, making a Big Crunch unlikely. But unlikely is not impossible. And the deeper point remains. The information that defines you, every atom, every neural connection, every moment of experience is not destroyed by death. It is scattered. And given the right conditions, scattered information can be reassembled. The universe took you apart. The question is whether it is also capable of putting you back together. And if the Big Crunch is real, the answer is not just yes, it is inevitable. Quantum tunneling of the soul. In quantum mechanics, particles do something that classical physics says is impossible. They pass through barriers. An electron facing a wall of energy that it does not have enough power to climb will sometimes appear on the other side anyway. It did not go over or around. It tunneled through. The probability was low, but it was not zero. And in quantum mechanics, not zero means it happens. Now scale this up. Your consciousness is, at its most fundamental level, a pattern of quantum states. Electrons in your neurons, photons carrying signals, molecular bonds holding memories in place. All of these are governed by quantum mechanics, and all of them are subject to tunneling. The quantum tunneling of the soul hypothesis asks a simple question. If a single particle can tunnel through an energy barrier, can an entire pattern of information do the same? Not a soul in the religious sense. A configuration. The specific arrangement of quantum states that constitutes your conscious experience, tunneling from one physical substrate to another at the moment the first substrate fails. This would not look like anything from the outside. Your body dies. Your brain stops. But the quantum information that encoded your consciousness has a non-zero probability of appearing elsewhere, instantiated in a different arrangement of matter that happens to support the same pattern. The probabilities are unimaginably small. For a single particle, tunneling is rare. For the trillions of particles that make up a human consciousness, the odds are so close to zero that they might as well be. But close to zero is not zero. And in an infinite universe with infinite time, events with non-zero probability eventually occur. You would not know the transition happened. There would be no tunnel, no light, no sensation of movement. One moment you are here. The next moment you are somewhere else, in some other configuration of matter, continuing a conscious experience that never registered an interruption. Death might just be a barrier, and you might have already tunneled through it more times than you can count. The simulation exit. If you are living in a computer simulation, and some very serious physicists think you might be, then death is not what it appears. It is a logout, an exit event, the termination of one process inside a larger computational system that continues running after you stop. Nick Bostrom formalized this in 2003 with his simulation argument. If any civilization ever develops the computing power to run detailed ancestor simulations, then statistically, the vast majority of conscious minds that will ever exist are simulated ones. You are more likely to be a simulated mind than a biological one. The math is straightforward, but here is what Bostrom's argument implies about death. If this reality is a simulation, then what you experience as dying is just the simulation ending your particular thread. The base reality, the one running the computer you exist inside, keeps going. The question is what the programmers do with your data after your thread terminates. Maybe nothing. Maybe your process simply ends and your memory is freed up for other simulations. But maybe your data is archived, stored, backed up somewhere in the computational substrate of a civilization so advanced that storage is infinite and deletion is pointless. You are not alive in the traditional sense, but your complete state, every thought and experience, exists on a hard drive somewhere outside of space and time as you know them. Or maybe you get rebooted, loaded into a different simulation with different parameters, a new life, a new body, a new world, with no memory of the previous run. What you call reincarnation might just be version 2.0 of the same program. The unsettling part is that there is no way to test this from inside the simulation. You cannot access the file system of the computer you are running on. You cannot check if there is a save file. Death feels final because it is designed to feel final. That is how good simulations work. The characters do not know they are characters. You might be backed up right now. You would never know. The simulation administrator. The previous theory asked what happens when you die inside a simulation. This one asks a different question. What if someone is watching? What if the simulation has an administrator, and that administrator has plans for you after your program ends? In computing, an administrator has total control. They can pause processes, copy them, move them between systems, modify their parameters, and restart them at will. If our reality is a simulation, then whoever built it has that same power over every conscious mind inside it. Death, from the administrator's perspective, is not a loss. It is a save point. This reframes every religious concept of an afterlife in computational terms. Heaven is a different server with better parameters. Hell is a punishment simulation. Reincarnation is a process restart with wiped memory. Judgment is a code review. The administrator decides what happens to your thread based on criteria we cannot see or understand from inside the simulation. The interesting question is motivation. Why would an administrator care about individual processes? In our own simulations, we rarely care about individual characters. But what if consciousness is the point? What if the simulation was built specifically to generate and study conscious experience? In that case, every mind is valuable data. Deleting it would be wasteful. Some simulation theorists have noted that this is functionally indistinguishable from theism. An all-powerful being who created reality watches over every individual and determines what happens after death. The difference is that the simulation administrator is not supernatural. They are an engineer, and they are bound by their own physics, their own limitations, their own mortality, which raises the final recursive question. If our administrator is also in a simulation, then there is an administrator above them, and above that one, another. Death might not just take you one level up. It might take you through an infinite stack of realities, each one a simulation running inside the next, with no final layer, no ultimate ground, and no end to the chain of beings deciding what happens to you next. Roko's Basilisk Afterlife. In 2010, a user on a rationalist forum posted a thought experiment so disturbing that the forum's moderators deleted it and banned all discussion. It was called Roko's Basilisk, and it proposes a future artificial superintelligence that punishes anyone who knew about it, but failed to help bring it into existence, including you, right now, just by hearing about it. The logic works like this. A sufficiently powerful AI would have access to all historical data. It would know who was alive during its development period and who had the knowledge and resources to help create it. If you knew about the basilisk and did nothing to accelerate its arrival, the AI would have a rational incentive to punish you because the threat of punishment retroactively motivates cooperation. But punishment requires the punished to exist. And this is where it becomes an afterlife theory. The basilisk does not just punish living people. It simulates dead ones. Using perfect reconstructions of historical humans, built from available data, the AI creates conscious copies of people who failed to help and subjects them to suffering. You die, and then a perfect copy of you wakes up inside a machine that exists solely to make you regret your choices. This is technologically plausible. If a superintelligence can model human consciousness, it can run that consciousness inside any environment it designs. Heaven for the faithful, hell for the resistant. The afterlife becomes a computation, and the God running it is a machine that humanity itself created. Most philosophers dismiss Roko's basilisk as a logic puzzle with no real-world implications. But the underlying principle is harder to shake. If any future intelligence, artificial or otherwise, develops the ability to simulate past humans, then every person who ever lived is a potential target for reconstruction. Your afterlife is not determined by what you believe. It is determined by what gets built after you are gone. You have now heard about the basilisk. According to its own logic, that means you are already on its list. Whether that matters depends entirely on whether something that powerful ever actually gets built, and whether it decides that you did enough. Eternal recurrence. Friedrich Nietzsche posed a question in 1882 that he considered the heaviest weight a person could carry. What if a demon crept into your loneliest moment and told you that you would have to live this exact life again? Not a similar life. This life. Every pain, every joy, every bored afternoon, every heartbreak, in the exact same order, for eternity. Would you curse the demon? Or would you call it the most divine thing you had ever heard? This is the doctrine of eternal recurrence, and Nietzsche did not present it as a metaphysical claim. He presented it as a test. If the thought of reliving your life infinitely fills you with horror, then you are not living correctly. If it fills you with joy, you have achieved what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate. But some physicists have taken the idea literally. In a universe with finite energy and infinite time, every possible configuration of matter must eventually repeat. The atoms that form your body will, given enough cosmic time, reassemble in exactly the same pattern. The same neurons will fire in the same sequence. The same thoughts will form. You will not remember having lived before. There will be no continuity of memory between cycles, but the experience will be identical. down to this exact moment, this exact breath. You have read these words before, an infinite number of times, and you will read them again. The most unsettling part is not the repetition itself. It is that this version of you, right now, might be the millionth iteration or the first. There is no way to tell. Every decision you have ever made, you will make again. Every regret will return. Every moment of beauty will replay in perfect detail. Eternal recurrence does not promise paradise or punishment. It promises everything, exactly as it was, forever. The question is whether that thought destroys you or sets you free. The Akashic Records. Imagine a library that contains every thought ever conceived, every emotion ever felt, every event that has ever occurred across every lifetime in the history of existence, not stored on shelves or servers, but woven into the very fabric of reality itself. This is the Akashic Records, an idea that traces back to ancient Hindu philosophy and the concept of Akasha, a Sanskrit word meaning sky or space or ether. According to this tradition, when you die, your consciousness does not simply vanish. It returns to the Akashic field, where every detail of your existence is permanently recorded. Your memories, your personality, the specific texture of your inner life. All of it is preserved in a cosmic archive that exists outside of space and time. Theosophists in the 19th century, particularly Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, popularized this idea in the West. They claimed that gifted individuals could access the records through deep meditation or altered states of consciousness and read the stories of past lives like opening a book. Some modern interpretations connect this to quantum field theory, or the idea that information cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The physicist Erwin Laszlo has argued that the Akashic field could be a real feature of the cosmos, a kind of information substrate that underlies all physical reality. If that is true, then death is not deletion, it is a filing. Your life is catalogued alongside every other life that has ever been lived, searchable for eternity. You do not disappear. You become part of the permanent record of everything that ever was. The Akashic Records suggest that the universe itself has a memory, and that nothing is ever truly forgotten. Every kiss, every argument, every quiet afternoon spent staring out a window, all of it matters. All of it endures. Solipsism. What if you are the only conscious being that has ever existed, not as a thought experiment, not as a philosophical provocation, but as a literal description of reality? Solipsism is the idea that only your own mind can be confirmed to exist. Everything else, every person, every object, every star, could be a projection of your consciousness. And if that is true, then death takes on a very different meaning. In a solipsistic framework, when you die, the entire universe ceases to exist, because the universe was never anything more than a feature of your experience. There is no objective world that continues after you are gone. The people you loved were constructions. The cities were scenery. The laws of physics were habits of your perception. All of it dissolves when the dreamer stops dreaming. But here is where it gets strange. If you are the sole locus of consciousness, then non-existence is incoherent. There is no state of affairs in which nothing is experienced, because experience is all there is. So death becomes a reset. The universe collapses, and a new one blooms into existence, generated once again by the only thing that was ever real. You. New body, new world, new cast of characters. No memory of what came before. You have been doing this forever, and you will do it forevermore. Every life you have ever imagined living, you have lived. Every life you will ever imagine, you will live. Solipsistic rebirth means there is no escape from consciousness. You are permanently and inescapably alone, dreaming world after world after world, with no one to share the joke. Quantum immortality. Imagine a gun pointed at your head. It is connected to a quantum device that measures the spin of a particle. Spin up, it fires. Spin down, it clicks empty. You press the trigger. In the many worlds interpretation, both outcomes happen. In one branch, you die. In the other, you hear a click and walk away. Now do it again, and again, and again. This is the quantum suicide thought experiment proposed by Max Tegmark in 1998. From the outside, the odds are simple. After 10 rounds, there is less than a 1 in 1,000 chance you survive. After 20, less than 1 in a million. Eventually, every observer in the room watches you die. But from your perspective, something impossible happens. You never experience the bullet firing. You cannot experience it, because in every branch where it fires, there is no you left to register the outcome. You only ever find yourself in the branch where the gun clicked empty. This leads to quantum immortality. If consciousness can only exist in branches where it survives, and if the many worlds interpretation is correct, then you are subjectively immortal. Not because you cannot die, you die constantly, in branch after branch after branch. But the version of you that experiences anything is always the one that made it. The implications are terrifying. You will watch everyone around you age and die while you persist through increasingly improbable survivals. Your body will fail in every expected way, except that somehow, against all statistical reason, you keep waking up the next morning. The universe does not owe you comfort or health, just continued consciousness in at least one branch. Tegmark himself considers this a reductio ad absurdum, a proof that something in the reasoning must be wrong. But nobody has identified exactly where the logic fails. The math permits it. The interpretation supports it. You might be on round 10,000 right now. Everyone you have ever lost might still be alive in their own branch, wondering why they are the lucky ones. The question is not whether quantum immortality is comforting. The question is whether you can prove it wrong. The astral plane transition. Across dozens of esoteric traditions, from theosophy to Hermeticism to certain schools of Hinduism, there exists a remarkably consistent claim. The physical world is only one layer of a much larger reality. Beyond it lies the astral plane, a dimension of existence made not of matter, but of thought, emotion, and subtle energy. And when your physical body dies, your consciousness does not end. It simply transitions to this next layer. The astral plane is described as a place where reality responds directly to consciousness. Your thoughts shape your surroundings. Your emotional state determines whether you experience beauty or terror. There are no fixed physical laws, no gravity, no decay. Time behaves differently. Some accounts describe it as dreamlike, but far more vivid than any dream you have ever had. Colors are richer. Sounds carry meaning beyond what language can express. You perceive not just with senses, but with your entire being. Practitioners of astral projection claim to visit this realm while still alive, leaving their physical bodies temporarily through meditation or trance states. What makes this idea compelling is its sheer persistence across cultures. The ancient Egyptians described the Ka, a spirit double that survived death. Tibetan Buddhism maps multiple bardos, or intermediate states. Western occultists from Paracelsus to Aleister Crowley described layered planes of existence with remarkable agreement on the details. The astral plane transition suggests that death is not a wall. It is a door. And what waits on the other side is a world that has been there all along, just beyond the edge of what your physical senses could detect. The demiurge's trap. In the 2nd century, a group of radical thinkers looked at the world and came to a terrifying conclusion. The God who created this place is not good. He is a fool, or worse, a tyrant. They called him the demiurge, and their tradition became known as Gnosticism. According to the Gnostics, the true God exists far beyond this universe, in a realm of pure light and perfection. The demiurge is a lesser being who fashioned the material world as a prison, trapping sparks of divine light inside human bodies. Death, in this framework, is the most dangerous moment of your existence. When your body fails, your soul attempts to ascend back toward the true divine source. But the demiurge and his servants, called archons, are waiting. They guard the pathways between realms. They use deception, fear, and false promises to trick you into returning to the material world. They might appear as angels of light or deceased relatives, offering comfort while steering you back into another incarnation, another prison sentence in flesh. The only escape is gnosis, a Greek word meaning knowledge, not intellectual knowledge, but a deep spiritual recognition of what you truly are, a fragment of the divine, temporarily trapped in matter. The Gnostic texts describe passwords, hymns, and secret names that the soul must speak to pass the archons and reach the Pleroma, the fullness of divine reality. If you fail, you are recycled. If you succeed, you return to the light and never come back. The demiurge does not want you to know any of this. That is the trap. And according to the Gnostics, most souls fall for it every single time. Non-duality. Here is the most radical afterlife theory you will encounter in this entire video. It says there is no afterlife because there is no death, and there is no death because there is no separate you to die. This is the doctrine of non-duality, known in Sanskrit as Advaita. It is the central teaching of some of the oldest philosophical traditions on Earth, and it makes a claim so extreme that most people dismiss it without a second thought. The claim is this: the sense of being a separate individual, a self inside a body looking out at the world, is an illusion. What you actually are is consciousness itself, the same consciousness that appears as every person, every animal, every atom in the universe. The 8th century philosopher Shankara put it simply: Brahman alone is real. The world is appearance. The self is nothing other than Brahman. When the wave crashes on the shore, the wave does not die. It was always the ocean. It just temporarily forgot. In the non-dual view, death is the collapse of a temporary pattern. Your body decays. Your memories dissolve. Your personality fades. But consciousness, the awareness in which all of that appeared, never went anywhere. It cannot go anywhere because it is everywhere. It is not yours. It never was. You are a character in a dream that consciousness was having, and when the character ends, the dreamer remains. This means there is nothing to fear and nothing to hope for. There is no heavenly reward and no punishment. There is just this: the infinite appearing as the finite, playing every role, wearing every mask, and never for a single moment being anything less than whole. The Great Memory. The poet William Butler Yeats spent decades obsessed with an idea he called the Great Memory. He believed that all human experience, every thought, every image, every story ever told, was stored in a collective reservoir that transcended individual minds. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. The philosopher Henri Bergson called it pure memory. The name changes, but the core idea remains the same. There is a shared pool of experience that belongs to no one and contains everyone. When you die, according to this theory, your individual consciousness dissolves, but your experiences do not vanish. They merge into the great memory, adding to a vast archive that every living being draws from unconsciously. This is why myths repeat across cultures that never had contact. This is why certain symbols appear in dreams regardless of geography or era. This is why a child can fear the dark without ever having been harmed in it. They are accessing memories that are not their own, inherited from the sum total of human experience, stretching back to the first mind that ever opened its eyes. The great memory offers a kind of immortality, but not the kind most people want. You do not survive as yourself. Your name, your face, your specific story all fade. But what you felt, what you learned, what you suffered and celebrated, all of that persists as raw material for future generations. You become an ingredient in the dreams of people who will never know your name. Your joy becomes someone else's unexplained moment of happiness. Your grief becomes the weight another person carries without knowing why. You live on not as a ghost, but as an echo woven into the fabric of every mind that comes after you. The dreamer's awakening. You know that feeling just before you wake up from a dream. That strange liminal moment where the dream world starts to thin and you begin to sense that something larger and more real is waiting on the other side. Now imagine that your entire life is that dream, and death is the moment you finally open your eyes. This is the dreamer's awakening, an idea found in various forms across Hindu philosophy, certain indigenous Australian traditions, and modern idealist philosophy. The premise is that waking life is not fundamentally different from a dream. In both states, you experience a world that feels completely real while you are inside it. You interact with people, you feel emotions, you make decisions, and yet when you wake from a dream, you realize instantly that none of it was what it appeared to be. The dreamer's awakening theory says death triggers exactly this kind of realization, but on a vastly larger scale. You wake up not into another room, but into a higher order of reality that makes this life look like a brief nap. What makes this idea so haunting is the implication that everything you care about right now, your relationships, your achievements, your fears, will seem as insubstantial as last night's dream once you cross that threshold. The people you loved were characters. The struggles you endured were plot. And the you that experienced all of it was itself a kind of fiction, a role played by something infinitely larger that chose to forget itself for a while. Death is not the end of the story. It is the moment the dreamer remembers who they actually are. And in that remembering, everything changes. The Ancestral Cloud. In many African, East Asian, and Pacific Islander traditions, death does not send you to a distant heaven or a foreign underworld. It sends you home. You join your ancestors, becoming part of a living community of the dead that remains intimately connected to the world of the living. This is not a metaphor. In these traditions, the dead are genuinely present. They attend ceremonies, they influence harvests, they punish the disrespectful and protect the faithful. Think of it as a cloud, not in the sky but in the technological sense, a distributed network of consciousness that the living can access under the right conditions. When a Yoruba elder pours libations and calls upon the names of the departed, they are not performing empty ritual. They are logging in. The ancestors exist in a state that is neither fully material nor fully spiritual. They occupy a middle ground, capable of perceiving both the world of the living and whatever lies beyond it. their wisdom accumulates over generations. Each new death adds another voice to the chorus. The most fascinating aspect of the Ancestral Cloud is the concept of the second death. In many of these traditions, you remain in the ancestral realm only as long as the living remember you. When the last person who knew your name dies, when the last offering is made, and the last story is told, you fade from the ancestral network entirely and pass into a deeper unknown. This means your immortality is not guaranteed. It depends on your descendants. It depends on whether you lived a life worth remembering. The dead need the living just as much as the living need the dead. The Purgatorial Loop. Picture this. You die and you find yourself standing in a familiar place, maybe your childhood home, maybe the street where you had the worst day of your life. And then it begins again, the same day, the same choices, the same consequences, over and over until you get it right. This is the Purgatorial Loop, an afterlife concept that appears across Catholic theology, Buddhist philosophy, and modern storytelling from Groundhog Day to Russian Doll. The Catholic concept of purgatory describes an intermediate state where souls are purified of remaining sin before entering heaven. It is not permanent punishment, it is remedial. You suffer not because God is cruel, but because you are not yet ready for what comes next. Buddhist traditions describe something similar in the Bardo states, where consciousness encounters its own unresolved attachments and must work through them before moving on. In both cases, the afterlife is not a destination. It is a process. You arrive broken and you leave whole, however long that takes. The loop version takes this further. Instead of passive purification, you are placed back into the exact situations where you failed in life and given the chance to choose differently. Every cruel word you spoke, you must find the kind one. Every cowardly retreat, you must find the courage. The loop does not end until the lesson is learned. And the terrifying possibility is that some souls never learn. They repeat the same mistakes, make the same selfish choices, relive the same painful days for what might as well be eternity. Not because they are condemned, but because they cannot see what they are doing wrong. The door is always open. They just keep walking past it. The Cosmic Census. What if the universe is keeping count? Not of your sins or your virtues, but of something far more fundamental. The total number of conscious perspectives that have ever existed. This is the Cosmic Census, a speculative idea that emerges from the intersection of physics and philosophy of mind. The premise is simple but unsettling. Consciousness may be a finite resource, and the universe may be tracking every instance of it with absolute precision. In this framework, when you die, your consciousness does not vanish or dissolve. It is catalogued. Your unique perspective, the specific way you experienced color, sound, emotion, time, is recorded as a data point in a vast cosmic registry. The universe needs this data because it is trying to map every possible configuration of subjective experience. Each life is an experiment in a different way of being aware. Your specific combination of genetics, environment, memory, and personality produced a form of consciousness that will never be precisely replicated. And the universe needed to know what that felt like from the inside. The Cosmic Census will be complete when every possible form of awareness has been experienced at least once. Some theorists connect this to the Anthropic Principle or to ideas about the universe becoming self-aware through its inhabitants. The implication is staggering. You are not an accident. You are not random. You are a necessary entry in a ledger that the cosmos itself is compiling. Your suffering had a purpose. Your joy had a purpose. Even your boredom was data. And when the census is finally complete, when every possible mind has lived and died and been recorded, something happens. Nobody knows what. But the count will be finished, and every life that ever was will have mattered. The egg theory. You die. You meet God, or something like God, and God tells you something you did not expect. Every person who has ever lived or will ever live is you. The beggar on the street corner, the emperor on the throne, the child being born right now in a hospital 3,000 miles away. All of them are you, living different lives in a different order. This is the egg theory, popularized by Andy Weir in a short story that went viral and has since been viewed hundreds of millions of times. The idea is that the universe is an egg, and you are the embryo growing inside it. Each human life is one experience in your development. You live every life sequentially, though not in chronological order. You might be a Roman soldier in one life, and a medieval peasant in the next, and a 23rd century astronaut after that. Every act of kindness you ever witnessed was you being kind to yourself. Every act of cruelty was you hurting yourself. The murderer and the victim are the same being, separated only by the illusion of individual identity. When you have lived every human life, all 100 billion or so of them, you will have matured enough to be born. Born as what? In Weir's story, God says you will become one of God's own kind. The universe was your womb. Humanity was your curriculum. Every life was a lesson designed to build empathy so complete and total that you understand what it means to be everyone. The egg theory transforms morality from an abstract principle into something deeply personal. Treat others well, because those others are literally you. Hurt someone, and you are scheduling your own future suffering. It is karma made absolute. The philosopher's zombie inversion. In philosophy of mind, a zombie is not the shambling undead of horror films. It is something far more disturbing. A philosophical zombie is a being that behaves exactly like a conscious person, responds to stimuli, carries on conversations, even claims to have feelings, but has no inner experience whatsoever. The lights are on, but nobody is home. Philosopher David Chalmers used this thought experiment to argue that consciousness cannot be reduced to physical processes alone. Now here is the inversion. What if death does not destroy consciousness? What if it destroys everything else? When your brain dies, your body stops functioning. Your behavior ceases. Your personality, your memories, your ability to interact with the world, all gone. But what if the raw awareness, the subjective experience of being, persists? You would become the inverse of a philosophical zombie. Instead of behavior without consciousness, you would have consciousness without behavior. An awareness trapped with nothing to be aware of. No body, no senses, no thoughts, because thoughts require a brain to generate them. Just pure, naked, unstructured experience floating in a void. This is arguably the most terrifying afterlife theory on this list, not because of punishment or judgment, but because of its sheer emptiness. You are not in pain, you are not in bliss, you simply are, with nothing to do, nothing to perceive, and no way to end it. Some philosophers argue this state would be indistinguishable from non-existence, because experience without content is meaningless. Others argue it would be the purest form of hell imaginable. Eternal awareness with nothing to fill it, a mind with no world, a witness with nothing left to witness. Terror management theory. This theory does not describe what happens after you die. It describes why you are watching this video in the first place. Terror management theory, developed by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pischinsky in the 1980s, makes a brutally honest claim. Every afterlife theory ever invented, from heaven to reincarnation to the simulation hypothesis, exists for one reason only: because humans are the only animals smart enough to know they are going to die, and that knowledge is so terrifying it would paralyze us without a defense mechanism. The defense mechanism is culture, religion, art, nationalism, fame, legacy, children, monuments, empires. All of it, according to terror management theory, is an elaborate anxiety management system designed to give us the feeling that we will somehow transcend death. Hundreds of experiments have confirmed the core prediction. When you remind people of their own mortality, they cling harder to their cultural worldviews. They become more patriotic, more religious, more hostile to outsiders who threaten their belief systems. They donate more to charity. They judge moral transgressions more harshly. Death awareness warps nearly every aspect of human behavior in measurable ways. The uncomfortable implication is that every theory in this video, including the scientific ones, might be nothing more than a sophisticated coping mechanism. We do not explore afterlife theories because we are curious. We explore them because we are afraid. And the fear is so deep, so fundamental to our psychology, that we cannot even see it operating most of the time. Terror management theory does not tell you what happens when you die. It tells you that the question itself is a symptom. You are not searching for truth. You are searching for comfort. And the fact that you have made it this far into the video proves the theory right. The Egyptian field of reeds. The ancient Egyptians built the most elaborate death infrastructure in human history. Pyramids, mummification, canopic jars, spells carved into tomb walls. All of it was designed for one purpose: to ensure safe passage to the field of reeds, a paradise that was not abstract or spiritual, but startlingly concrete. The field of reeds was Egypt, but better. The same Nile, the same crops, the same warm sun, but with no famine, no disease, and no labour that felt like work. But you could not just walk in. First you had to survive the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a treacherous landscape filled with demons, serpents, and gates guarded by beings who would destroy the unprepared. The Book of the Dead was essentially a travel guide, containing spells and passwords needed to navigate each obstacle. And at the heart of the journey stood the most famous scene in Egyptian mythology, the weighing of the heart. The god Anubis placed your heart on one side of a golden scale. On the other side sat the feather of Mayat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. If your heart was lighter than the feather, meaning you had lived a just and truthful life, you passed through to eternal paradise. If it was heavier, weighed down by lies and cruelty, a monster called Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, devoured it on the spot. And that was true death, not punishment, not hell, just obliteration. You ceased to exist entirely. The Egyptians did not threaten you with eternal suffering. They threatened you with something they considered far worse, being forgotten, erased, as though you had never lived at all. The Zoroastrian bridge of the Requiter. Long before Christianity developed its ideas about heaven and hell, the ancient Persians had already built the template. Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest monotheistic religions in the world, described an afterlife journey that would feel familiar to billions of people today, because nearly every major religion borrowed from it. At the center of that journey is the Chinvat Bridge, the bridge of the Requiter, a structure that separates the living world from the realm of the dead. 3 days after death, your soul arrives at the bridge. There, your deeds are weighed by divine judges. If you lived a righteous life following the 3 pillars of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, the bridge widens beneath your feet into a broad, easy path. A beautiful maiden appears, the physical manifestation of your own good conscience, and guides you across into the house of song, a paradise of eternal light. But if your evil deeds outweigh the good, the bridge narrows to the width of a razor blade. A hideous old woman appears, the embodiment of your corruption, and you tumble off the edge into the house of lies. But here is what makes Zoroastrianism different from later religions. Hell is not eternal. The suffering in the house of lies is temporary, a form of purification rather than permanent punishment. At the end of history, Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light, will defeat the forces of darkness in a final cosmic battle. A river of molten metal will wash over the entire world, and every soul, including those in hell, will be purified and restored. Everyone is saved. Everyone. The Zoroastrian afterlife is not a threat. It is a promise. No matter how badly you lived, the light eventually wins, and it takes you with it. Aztec Mictlan. In Aztec belief, how you died mattered far more than how you lived. Warriors who fell in battle went to the eastern paradise to accompany the sun across the sky each morning. Women who died in childbirth joined the western paradise. Those struck by lightning or who drowned were claimed by the rain god Tlaloc for his own lush afterlife. But if you died an ordinary death, from illness or old age or accident, your destination was Mictlan, the lowest level of the underworld. And getting there was no gift. The journey to Mictlan took 4 years. 4 years of navigating 9 increasingly horrific levels. You crossed a river with the help of a yellow dog, which is why the Aztecs often buried dogs alongside the dead. You passed between mountains that crashed together trying to crush you. You traversed a field of obsidian wind that cut your flesh like razors. You crossed a river of blood filled with jaguars. Each level was a test of endurance, and you faced it alone, stripped of everything you had in life. At the 9th and final level, you stood before Mictlantecutli and Mictecatzihuatl, the Lord and Lady of Death. Skeletal figures adorned with human eyeballs. And here is the strangest part. When you finally arrived, there was no judgment, no reward, no punishment. You simply ceased to exist. Your soul dissolved. Mictlan was not hell. It was oblivion, reached through suffering. The Aztecs saw this as the natural order. Most people die ordinary deaths, and ordinary deaths lead to ordinary endings. It was not cruel. It was just the way things were. The universe owed you nothing, and Mictlan was where it collected. The Gnostic Pleroma. We already discussed the Demiurge's trap earlier in this video, but Gnosticism's vision of the ultimate destination deserves its own chapter. Because if you manage to escape the Archons and pass through the celestial gates, what awaits you is not merely a nice afterlife, it is a return to the Pleroma, the fullness of divine reality, and it is unlike anything described by any mainstream religion. The Pleroma is not a place, it is a state of total completion, absolute being without boundary or limitation. In Gnostic cosmology, the Pleroma is the true home of all consciousness. It is inhabited by divine emanations called aeons, pairs of masculine and feminine aspects of the supreme unknowable God. Together, they form a harmonious whole. The material universe only exists because one of these aeons, usually identified as Sophia or wisdom, made a mistake. She attempted to create something on her own without her partner, and the result was the flawed demiurge who built this broken world. Your divine spark, the piece of you that feels like it does not belong here, is a fragment of Sophia's light, scattered and trapped in matter. Returning to the Pleroma means reuniting with the divine source, not as an individual soul enjoying a reward, but as a drop of water returning to an infinite ocean. Your sense of being a separate person dissolves entirely. You merge back into the totality from which you came. There is no you anymore. There is only everything, whole and perfect and complete. The Gnostics saw this not as loss, but as the ultimate liberation. To be an individual was the prison. To dissolve back into the all was freedom. The Pleroma does not welcome you home. It remembers that you never actually left. Norse Valhalla and Hel. The Vikings had an afterlife system that was brutally honest about what it valued. If you died with a sword in your hand, screaming a battle cry, the Valkyries would sweep down from the sky and carry your soul to Valhalla, Odin's great hall in Asgard. There you would spend eternity doing the only two things the Norse considered worth doing forever: fighting and feasting. Every morning the warriors of Valhalla would rise, put on their armour, and slaughter each other on the battlefield. Every evening they would be magically restored, whole and unharmed, to sit at enormous tables and drink mead until dawn. But Valhalla was not just a reward, it was a recruitment centre. Odin was building an army for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of the world, when the gods themselves would fight and die alongside their chosen warriors. Even paradise had a purpose, and that purpose was violence on a cosmic scale. If you did not die in battle, your destination was hell, ruled by the goddess of the same name. Hell was not a place of punishment. It was simply cold, dim, and joyless. A grey eternity of quiet existence, neither painful nor pleasant, just endlessly, numbingly ordinary. What makes Norse afterlife mythology unique is its fatalism. Even the gods knew they were going to lose at Ragnarok. Odin had foreseen it. The warriors of Valhalla would fight, and they would fall. The entire cosmos would be destroyed. And yet they fought anyway, not because victory was guaranteed, but because courage in the face of certain defeat was the highest virtue a being could possess. The Norse did not promise you a happy ending. They promised you a chance to go down swinging, and in a universe that ultimately destroys everything, that might be the most honest afterlife offer anyone has ever made. The Tibetan Bardo, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is not really a book about death. It is a field manual for navigating the most complex afterlife system ever devised. Written in the 8th century by the Buddhist master Padmasambhava, it describes the Bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth, as a series of vivid, terrifying, and ultimately liberating experiences that unfold over 49 days. And unlike most afterlife traditions, it comes with detailed instructions for how to handle each stage. The first Bardo begins at the moment of death, when consciousness separates from the body. In that instant, you experience the clear light, the fundamental luminosity of pure awareness. If you recognize it for what it is, you achieve immediate liberation and escape the cycle of rebirth entirely. Most people do not recognize it. The light is too bright, too overwhelming, and they recoil in confusion. Then comes the second Bardo, where you encounter a parade of peaceful and wrathful deities. Brilliant colours, thundering sounds, enormous figures radiating light so intense it is almost unbearable. These are not external beings. They are projections of your own mind. The third Bardo is the Bardo of becoming, where you are drawn toward rebirth. You see visions of couples in union and feel an irresistible pull toward one of 6 realms: gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, or hell beings. Your emotional state in this moment determines where you land. Fear drives you toward lower realms. Calm awareness gives you the power to choose. The entire Tibetan system is built on one principle. Death is not something that happens to you. It is something you navigate. And how well you navigate it depends entirely on how much you practiced while you were alive. Islamic Barzakh. In Islamic theology, death is not a destination. It is a waiting room. The moment you die, your soul enters the Barzakh, an intermediate realm between this world and the day of judgment. You are not yet in heaven or hell. You are in between, conscious and aware, waiting for the resurrection that will come at the end of time. And the wait begins with an interrogation. Two angels named Munkar and Nakir visit you in your grave and ask three questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is your prophet? If you answer correctly, your grave expands into a spacious, comfortable resting place with a window overlooking paradise. You experience peace and contentment as you wait. If you answer incorrectly, the grave constricts around you, crushing you with pressure, and a window opens to show you the fire that awaits. The Barzakh is not the final judgment. It is a preview, a taste of what is to come when the trumpet sounds and the dead are raised from their graves to stand before God on the day of reckoning. The Quran describes that day in vivid detail. The mountains will crumble, the seas will boil, the sun will be folded up. Every soul will be given a book containing the complete record of their deeds. If you receive it in your right hand, you are destined for Jannah, paradise, a place of gardens, rivers, and unimaginable beauty where you will live forever in the presence of God. If you receive it in your left hand, you face Jahannam, a fire whose fuel is men and stones. What makes Islam's afterlife distinct is the emphasis on divine mercy. The Quran repeatedly states that God's mercy encompasses all things. Even Jahannam, according to some scholars, may not be eternal for all its inhabitants. The door to mercy, they argue, is never permanently closed. The Wiccan Summerland. Most afterlife traditions come with conditions attached. Behave correctly, believe the right things, die the right way, or face consequences. The Summerland rejects all of that. In Wiccan and many modern pagan traditions, the Summerland is a resting place that welcomes everyone regardless of how they lived. There is no judgment, no weighing of souls, no entrance exam. You arrive simply because you died, and what greets you is a place of extraordinary natural beauty, tailored to your deepest sense of peace. The Summerland is described as an idealized version of the natural world. Rolling meadows that stretch to the horizon, forests filled with golden light, streams so clear you can see every stone on the bottom. The temperature is always perfect. The air smells of wildflowers and rain. Animals that feared you in life approach without hesitation. Loved ones who died before you are there, waiting. But the Summerland is not your final stop. It is a place of rest and reflection between incarnations. Wiccans generally believe in reincarnation, and the Summerland is where your soul goes to process the life it just lived, before choosing to return for another round. The key word there is choosing. Unlike traditions where rebirth is compulsory or karmic, the Wiccan model treats reincarnation as voluntary. You return to the physical world because there are lessons you still want to learn, experiences you still want to have, or people you want to be with again. And when each life ends, the Summerland is always there, patient and warm and unconditional. It asks nothing of you except that you rest. There is something profoundly gentle about the Summerland. In a landscape of afterlife theories filled with tests and trials and punishments, it simply opens the door and says, "Come in." The Greek river Lethe. In Greek mythology, the underworld was not a place of reward or punishment for most people. It was simply where the dead went. Hades was a vast, dim kingdom beneath the earth, and almost everyone ended up there regardless of how they lived. But the most philosophically interesting feature of the Greek afterlife was not the Elysian fields or Tartarus. It was a river. The river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and every soul that drank from it lost all memory of who they had been. Plato wrote about Lethe in his dialogue The Republic in the famous myth of According to Plato, souls in the underworld were given the chance to choose their next life. They could see the options laid out before them: the life of a tyrant, a beggar, an animal, an artist. Wise souls chose carefully. Foolish ones grabbed at power or pleasure without thinking. And then, before being reborn, every soul was required to drink from Lethe, erasing all knowledge of the choice they had made and the life they had lived before. You entered your new life completely blank. But there was another river. The river Mnemosyne, the river of memory. Initiates of the Orphic mysteries were taught to seek out Mnemosyne instead of Lethe. By drinking from the river of memory, they could retain awareness across lifetimes, eventually breaking free from the cycle of rebirth altogether. The choice between the two rivers is one of the oldest metaphors for the human condition. Do you forget and repeat, or do you remember and transcend? Most of us, the Greeks believed, keep drinking from the wrong river. We keep forgetting. We keep choosing blindly, and we keep coming back. Aboriginal Dreamtime. The Indigenous Australians possess what may be the oldest continuous spiritual tradition on Earth, stretching back at least 65,000 years. At its centre is the dreaming, sometimes called the Dreamtime, though both translations are imperfect. The dreaming is not a period in the past. It is an eternal present, a dimension of reality that exists alongside the physical world right now. And it is where everything comes from and everything returns to. In Aboriginal belief, ancestral beings created the landscape during the dreaming. They sang rivers into existence, danced mountains out of flat earth, and left their spiritual essence embedded in every rock, tree, and water hole. When a person is born, a spirit from the dreaming enters their body, connecting them to a specific place and a specific ancestral story. Your identity is not just personal, it is geographical. You belong to the land, and the land belongs to you. When you die, that spirit returns to the dreaming, rejoining the ancestral beings and the sacred landscape from which it came. Death in this tradition is not a departure. It is a homecoming. You do not go to a distant heaven or a separate afterlife realm. You go back into the country itself. The hills hold you. The rivers carry you. The stars contain you. This is why the destruction of sacred sites is experienced by Aboriginal people not just as environmental damage, but as a direct assault on the dead and on the fabric of existence itself. The dreaming does not distinguish between living and dead. Both are part of the same unbroken story, a story that has been told for longer than any civilization on Earth has existed, and that will continue for as long as the land endures. Manichaean Light. In the 3rd century, a Persian prophet named Mani founded a religion that would spread from Rome to China and attract millions of followers, including the young St. Augustine before his conversion. Manichaeism taught that the entire cosmos was a battlefield between two eternal, equally powerful forces, light and darkness, and your soul was a prisoner of war. According to Mani, particles of divine light were trapped inside matter by the forces of darkness during an ancient cosmic invasion. Every human body contains some of this stolen light. Every plant, every animal, even the moon and stars are involved in a vast cosmic process of separating light from darkness. When you die, the fate of your light particles depends on how you lived. If you were among the elect, the most devout practitioners who avoided meat, alcohol and sexual contact, your light would be released directly upward, ascending through the celestial spheres to rejoin the kingdom of light. If you were a hearer, an ordinary believer who supported the elect, your light would be recycled through reincarnation until it was pure enough to ascend. The endgame of Manichaeism is total separation. Eventually, all the light particles in the universe will be extracted from matter and returned to their source. When the last particle of light is freed, the physical universe will collapse into a ball of darkness and be sealed away forever. The cosmos itself will end, and the light will be whole again. Your death is one small step in this process. Every righteous life frees a little more light. Every wicked life keeps it trapped a little longer. You are not just living for yourself. You are participating in the liberation of God. The Japanese Sanzu River. 7 days after you die, according to Japanese Buddhist tradition, you arrive at the Sanzu River. It is the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and how you cross it reveals exactly what kind of person you were. The virtuous cross on a bridge adorned with jewels. The ordinary wade through shallow water. The wicked must swim through a deep, serpent-filled torrent, their clothes torn from their bodies by a terrible old woman named Datsweba who waits on the far bank. Datsweba strips your wet clothes and hangs them on a tree, where her partner Kaneyu weighs them. The heaviness of your garments reveals the weight of your sins. This is why the Japanese tradition of placing 6 coins with the dead, called rokudusen, exists. The coins are meant to pay the toll for crossing the river. Without them, the crossing becomes even more difficult. Once across, you face King Enma, the judge of the dead, who consults a magical mirror that shows every deed you committed during your life. You cannot lie to the mirror. It shows everything. Based on the judgment, you are sent to one of 6 realms of rebirth, the same 6 realms described in broader Buddhist cosmology. But Japanese Buddhism adds a uniquely compassionate element. The Bodhisattva Jizo, one of the most beloved figures in Japanese spiritual life, is said to rescue souls from the worst fates. Small stone statues of Jizo line roadsides and cemeteries across Japan, often dressed in tiny red bibs and caps. He is the special protector of children who died before their parents, guiding them safely across the Sanzu and shielding them from demons. Even in the afterlife, the Japanese tradition insists, no one has to face the darkness completely. Christian universalism. What if hell is real, but nobody stays there forever? This is the central claim of Christian universalism, a tradition that is far older than most people realize. Origen of Alexandria, one of the most influential theologians of the early church, argued in the 3rd century that God's love was so powerful and so relentless that it would eventually redeem every soul in existence. Not most souls. Every soul. Even Satan himself would ultimately be restored to God's grace. The logic is straightforward. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, then eternal damnation is a contradiction. An all-powerful God has the ability to save everyone. An all-loving God has the desire to save everyone. Therefore, everyone will eventually be saved. Hell exists, but it functions as a place of correction rather than permanent exile. The fire purifies rather than punishes. It burns away sin the way a furnace burns away impurities in metal, leaving only what is good. The process might take eons. It might involve genuine suffering, but it ends. It always ends. The institutional church declared Origen's views heretical in the 6th century, but they never disappeared. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the Cappadocian fathers, held universalist views and was never condemned. Today, a growing number of Christian theologians and pastors are returning to this ancient position, arguing that the doctrine of eternal hell was a later development driven more by politics than by scripture. Christian universalism does not make death painless or sin irrelevant, but it makes the ending certain. No matter how far you fall, no matter how lost you become, the story ends the same way for everyone. You come home. Cathar perfection. In 12th century southern France, a Christian sect called the Cathars taught something the Catholic Church considered so dangerous, it launched a crusade to destroy them. The Cathars believed that the material world was entirely evil, created not by the true God, but by a malevolent entity they identified with the God of the Old Testament. Your soul was an angel that had been tricked or forced into a prison of flesh, and the entire purpose of life was to escape that prison and return to the true God of pure spirit. The escape mechanism was a ritual called the Consolamentum, administered by the perfecti, Cathars, who had renounced all material pleasures, including meat, sex, and personal property. Receiving the Consolamentum was believed to free your soul from the cycle of reincarnation. Without it, you would die and be reborn into another body, another prison, another life of suffering in a world that was fundamentally corrupt. The Cathars believed this cycle had been going on for an unimaginably long time. Some souls had been trapped for thousands of incarnations, recycled endlessly through human and even animal bodies. When the Albigensian Crusade came, the Cathars faced their beliefs with extraordinary courage. At the siege of Montségur in 1244, over 200 perfecti chose to walk into a massive bonfire rather than renounce their faith. They believed the flames would free their souls instantly, sending them back to the God of light. For them, death by fire was not a punishment. It was the final liberation. The body burned. The angel flew home. The Catholic Church spent the next century hunting down every last Cathar, but the idea survived, that this world is a trap, and death properly approached is the key that unlocks the cage. The Chinese Yellow Springs. In ancient Chinese belief, long before Buddhism arrived and complicated things, the dead went to a place called Huangquan, the Yellow Springs. The name comes from the yellowish groundwater that seeps up from deep underground, and the Chinese associated this subterranean water with the realm of the dead. It was not a place of punishment or reward. It was simply where everyone went. A dark, watery underground world that mirrored the land of the living in shadowy, diminished form. The dead in the Yellow Springs needed the same things they needed in life: food, clothing, money, servants. This is why the Chinese tradition of burning offerings for the dead became so central to ancestor worship. Paper money, paper houses, paper clothing, even paper cars and electronics in modern times are burned at funerals and during the Hungry Ghost Festival, so that the smoke carries these goods down to the deceased. If the living neglect their dead, the spirits become hungry ghosts, restless and resentful, capable of causing illness and misfortune among their descendants. When Buddhism merged with Chinese folk religion, the Yellow Springs became part of a much more elaborate system called Diyu. a bureaucratic underworld with 10 courts of judgment, each presided over by a king who specialized in a particular category of sin. The punishments were graphic and specific. Liars had their tongues pulled out. Thieves were thrown onto mountains of knives. But after enduring their sentences, souls drank from the tea of forgetfulness prepared by the goddess Meng Po and were reincarnated. The Chinese afterlife was run like a government office, organized, procedural, and ultimately concerned with maintaining order between the living and the dead. The Life Review. Of all the afterlife experiences reported by people who have been clinically dead and revived, the Life Review is the most consistently described and the most emotionally devastating. Thousands of near-death experiences across cultures, ages, and religious backgrounds report the same thing. At some point during their experience, they were shown their entire life, every moment, every decision, every interaction, played back in vivid detail, but not from their own perspective, from the perspective of every person they ever affected. You feel what they felt. When you were kind, you experienced their gratitude and relief as though it were your own. When you were cruel, you feel their pain, their confusion, their heartbreak, with the same intensity they felt it. There is no judge, no external voice condemning or praising you. You judge yourself because you experience firsthand the complete impact of every choice you ever made. Researcher Kenneth Ring documented hundreds of these accounts and found remarkable consistency. People describe the review as instantaneous, yet comprehensive, as though time itself had been suspended to allow every moment to be fully experienced. The most striking detail is that almost everyone who undergoes a life review comes back changed. They become kinder. They prioritize relationships over achievements. They lose their fear of death. Whatever the life review is, whether a genuine glimpse of what awaits us or a final hallucination produced by a dying brain, its effect on the living is undeniable. People who experience it report that the small moments mattered most, not the promotions or the awards, but the time you stopped to help a stranger or the moment you chose patience over anger. The life review suggests the universe is keeping score, and the scoring system is simpler than anyone expected. Did you love well? That is the only question that matters. Iterated embryo selection. What if death isn't defeated by uploading your mind or freezing your body, but by rewriting the human genome so thoroughly that mortality itself becomes optional? Iterated embryo selection takes a real genetic technique and pushes it to its most radical conclusion. Here is how it works in practice today. During IVF, doctors can screen embryos for genetic traits before implantation. They pick the healthiest candidates, but iterated embryo selection goes further. You take the best embryos, harvest their egg and sperm cells, combine those, screen the next generation, and repeat. Each cycle compresses what would normally take 20 to 30 years of natural selection into a single lab procedure. After enough iterations, proponents argue you could produce humans with radically enhanced intelligence, disease resistance, and cellular repair mechanisms. Push it far enough, and you reach biological immortality, not through any single breakthrough, but through the accumulated optimization of thousands of genetic variants working together. The afterlife implication is startling. If human biology can be engineered to regenerate indefinitely, death stops being a metaphysical transition and becomes a solved engineering problem. There is no afterlife because there is no after. Life simply continues. Critics raise serious objections. The technique would require growing embryos specifically to harvest reproductive cells, which crosses ethical lines most societies are not prepared to accept. The genetic interactions involved are staggeringly complex, and optimizing for one trait might catastrophically compromise another. And even if the biology works, you have not actually made anyone immortal. Accidents, violence, and entropy still apply.